Hello, welcome to the webinar training series on digital ethnography. Today we will look at the concept called social worlds. Digital ethnography, researching social worlds. In our course outline, we have prescribed a textbook called Digital Ethnography, Principles and Practice. So written by Professor Sara Pink and Heather Holst and John Postil and Larissa Hijot and Tanya Levis and Joe Tachi. These are the authors of this book. So in their book, Digital Ethnography, Principles and Practice, they have suggested 7 concepts. The 7 key concepts and cultural theories used for the design and analysis of ethnographic research. These concepts were selected to represent a range of different routes to approaching the social world. So we have been looking at different concepts. They have proposed 7 concepts to undertake digital ethnography meaningfully and productively. So those 7 concepts are experiences and practices, things, relationships, social worlds, localities, and events. So today we will look at social worlds. Social worlds, the groups and wider social configurations through which people relate to each other. So the concept of social world means the groups and wider social configurations through which people relate to each other. In this session, we will examine how digital how digital ethnographers research social worlds. We first introduce how social worlds are broadly defined, have figured in social research historically as a central concern of anthropologists and sociologists. The study of social worlds has been a focal element for ethnographers since the inception of these disciplines, and has also been important to related interdisciplinary fields of study, including media studies and media anthropology. The concept of social worlds has been debated across a range of different theoretical perspectives. Some of these debates downplay its relevance, however, others play it at the center of the analysis. In a digital context, some researchers have debated to what extent the social worlds that involve digital elements are reducing, increasing, or changing social life and its consequences. What is the concept of social worlds? The concept of social worlds, unlike others discussed, the concept of social worlds, unlike others discussed in their book of digital ethnography, principles and practice, such as practices, social things or events, does not have a trajectory of use in the social sciences as a defining theory. Instead, they use the notion of social worlds as a heuristic or experimental device, that is, as an open-ended way of exploring a question. By social worlds, others mean those relatively bounded but never airtight domains of social life. Ethnographers typically immerse themselves in these worlds by spending long periods of time with their research participants. The potential variation of these worlds is as vast as that of human socio-cultural diversity. They can range widely from the worlds inhabited by bikers, surfers, farmers, nuns, or herders to those of online poker players, 3D virtual environments, Facebook groups, or Weibo users. Immersing oneself through participant observation in a new social world ethnographically is a process. It can be awkward at times and usually involves a steep learning curve about the inhabitants of that world and their everyday lives. Immersion, participant observation, and the everyday quote unquote, the everyday, or three ideas that are bound up with how we study social worlds. However, one problem that complicates the apparently neat immersion metaphor is that social worlds are never sealed off from other social worlds, or indeed from the rest of humankind in our massively interconnected world. Unlike most swimming pools, to continue with the immersion metaphor, social worlds are not usually walled off or separated from other pools. In fact, they tend to intersect with other worlds, with their boundaries neither fixed nor always clear to insiders or outsiders. People come and go, and the worlds wax and wane over time. People come and go, and the worlds wax and wane over time. For example, internet activists might move between different groups while remaining activists, or they might refocus their politics from, for example, resistance to taking up a political position. Postal 2010. How social science and humanities scholars try to understand and define social worlds? We focus on a set of key concepts that have been, and in some cases continue to be, influential across academic disciplines. We first look at how the concepts of community and network, community quote unquote, and a network quote and unquote, have been used in what we might characterize as a pre-digital sociology and anthropology in order to try to understand social worlds and how they were structured, connected, and bound together. We next discuss how these were then adapted to the internet. Joining other contemporary scholars, we take a critical view of these concepts to suggest that some of the gaps they leave can be filled with the plural concept of sociologies. We take a critical view of these concepts to suggest that some of the gaps they leave can be filled with the plural concept of, quote, socialities, unquote. So long as we regard this concept as a handy research tool and not as a theoretical panacea. Indeed, as we later suggest, the types of social world that we might work with as a digital ethnographers in a digital material environment of social media platforms and mobile and locative technologies would be hard to squeeze into the framework of either community or a network because they were developed in conventional studies during the 20th century. How have social worlds been studied then? Various concepts have been used to understand and research social worlds. In the past, these have sought to account for the specific cultures associated with social groups or collectives. In the earlier parts of the 20th century, a culture was generally assumed to coincide with a group of people who lived together in one place. This idea was undermined by the critical literature of the 1980s and onwards that dissociated culture from place. Example, Gupta and Ferguson, 1997. And shifted focus towards the multi-sidedness of culture and shifted focus towards the multi-sidedness of culture and the need and therefore to do ethnography that stretches across multiple sites. Marcus, 1995. In sociology and cultural studies, this urge to associate social groups with the cultural boundedness and internal similarity led to concepts such as that of subculture. Gelder, 2007, Hebdig, 1995, and ethnic groups. These classifications had a similar effect of dividing social worlds into sets of discrete entities. The concept of community also played a dominant role in describing social groupings through much of the 20th century. Community studies were a key unit of analysis for both anthropologists and sociologists, particularly around the middle of the century. The concept of community creates a, quote, feel good, unquote, sense of human togetherness, evoking a social world that is warm and supportive. As an academic concept, however, it is limited in its empirical application to as an academic concept, however, it is limited in its empirical application to describing in 2008 as excuse me. A weird admit summarizes, invocations of community do not present analysts with the clear-cut groupings so much as signal fields of complex processes through which sociality is sought, rejected, argued over, realized, interpreted, exploited, or enforced. Amit identifies a slippage between the ideas of community as an actual social group and as an imagined category. Let me repeat it. As where Amit summarizes, invocations, quote, invocations of community do not present analysts with the clear-cut groupings so much as signal fields of complex processes through which sociality is sought, rejected, argued over, realized, interpreted, exploited, or enforced, unquote. 2002. Amit identifies a slippage between the ideas of community as an actual social group and as an imagined category. Indeed, according to some scholars, by the end of the 20th century, the concept of community had little use as an analytical category, discussed in Pink 2008. However, it remained important as a category that could be explored with the participants because it had local meanings as well as academic significance. The concept of community thus fostered greater understanding of people's perceptions of social relationships and the political implications of collective terms. For example, Pink's interviews with the slow city activists in England included exploring their definitions of community. They often told her that the term was a policy category that they needed to use, but that it was also for them quite meaningless beyond it, referring in policy terms to a specific geographically located group of people. Pink, 2008. Other academic uses of the term community have reconceptualized it in ways that are more useful than the original formulation, including concepts such as the communities of practice, quote, communities of practice, unquote, Wenger, 1998, that refers to the doing of community through active participation in sets of practices that bind people together. Wagner, 1991. The concept of the network, the concept of the, quote, network, unquote, has also played a key role in the development of social research in the 20th century. This concept was particularly important in the work of the anthropologists in the 1950s and 1960s, who sought new ways of understanding the relationships between the way society was structured and the ways in which social relationships and activities come together. Post till 2011. In part, the idea of researching social networks also depended on the specific methods used in ethnographic research, in that these anthropologists, who were largely working in urban settings, such as in African cities, began to follow individuals across social fields in the hope that these observations would be able to capture the open-ended nature of much social life, post 2011, and C. Mitchell. For anthropologists, however, this approach became increasingly redundant because it was not applicable to the type of work that often characterizes anthropology, especially the practice of focusing on smaller groups. As a result, it was little used by the 1970s, post 2011. Outside of anthropology, this theoretical strand survived in the social sciences. At the same time, what was known as social network analysis, SNA, social network analysis, became popular among sociologists and economists, especially since computers were now becoming mainstream tools in the work of social scientists. Freeman, 2007, post 2011. Granovetter's work in the USA demonstrated how Boston job seekers found that their weak connections, meaning their connections with the friends of friends. Let me repeat. Granovetter's work in the USA demonstrated how Boston job seekers found that their, quote, weak, unquote, connections, meaning their connections with the friends of friends, helped them more in their job seeking than their strong connections with the family and close friends. Granovetter's 1973 famous thesis of the strength of weak ties, quote, strength of weak ties, unquote, is a landmark study in this area and continues to be influential in the contemporary studies of the internet. Wallman et al., 2003. Mobile communication, Link, 2004, and the communication studies broadly, Hathor White, 1996. More recently, anthropologists have also re-engaged. With the concept of social networks, which importantly for the question of digital ethnography theory and practice, has meant that it has been used in dialogue with ethnographic research. Freeman, 2007, Postal, 2011. This has become particularly relevant for the study of social activism, which, as we also show in this book, the authors also show this in this book, in a field of practice that is often highly implicated in the use of digital and social media. Example, Juris, 2008. Yet, at the same time, there have been a good number of anthropologists who have critically engaged with the concept of social networks and sought to rethink its assumptions. Example, Amit, 2007, Horst and Miller, 2006, Moiran, 2002, Postal, 2011, Pink, 2012. Existing concepts and understanding of digital social worlds. What are the existing concepts and the understanding of digital social worlds? The ongoing boom in the internet sites and mobile technologies centered around individuals and their own personal networks has been a fertile ground for the application of SNA, social network analysis, and network theory to sociological research into the internet. In part, this has involved the use of SNA amongst internet researchers, Chu et al. 2011, Trousseau et al. 2010. However, there have been other influential scholars in this field who have advanced our understanding of networks in new directions. One of the most influential works in this is by the sociologist Manuel Castells, who developed the theory of the network society, published in his trilogy of books between 1996 that fluid transnational networks are age, replacing earlier formations such as communities or associations, and also following a sociological approach. Other influential scholars have linked this trend to the global rise of code, networked individualism. 2003. For Wellman, the local neighborhood is no longer a key site for social relationships in North America. Wellman and Lincoln, 1979. Instead, he proposes that communities have come to exist in the form of, quote, geographically dispersed, unquote, personal communities. Instead, he proposes that communities have come to exist in the form of geographically dispersed personal communities, which are personal networks of the type written about the sociologist Ray Paul, 2005, and Postal, 2011. For these others, the internet merely reinforces a global trend towards a networked individualism that was already well underway, Postal, 2011. In such a world, quote unquote, communities, quote unquote, have not disappeared, but have been reconfigured around individuals' personal networks. Let me repeat this statement. In such a world, quote, communities, unquote, have not dispersed, have not disappeared, but have been reconfigured around individuals' personal networks. Related to Castell's work and also following a sociological approach, other influential scholars have linked this trend to the global rise of networked individualism. Example, Wellman et al. 2003. For Wellman, the local neighborhood is no longer a key site for social relationships in North America. Wellman late in 1979. Instead, he proposes that communities have come to exist in the form of geographically dispersed personal communities, which are personal networks of the type written about by the sociologist Ray Paul, post in 2011. For these others, the internet merely trend towards networked individualism that was already well underway. In such a world, communities have not disappeared, but have been reconfigured around individuals' personal network. More recently, the notion of community has also been revived in internet geography. More recently, the notion of a community has also been revived in internet ethnography. A key example for our discussion here is Rob Koginet's ethnography approach, 2010. Ethnography has become fast established and discussed by ethnographers working online and offers a useful framework for some types of analysis. One of the key concepts that underpins ethnography is that of community, along with the idea that communities can be found and studied online. Kojinet defines online communities as having both online, virtual, and offline face-to-face elements. He mobilizes the term community in a specific way, in that he suggests that it should be used to refer to a group of people who share social interaction, social ties, and a common interactional format, location, or space, albeit in this case, a computer-mediated virtual cyberspace. He further proposes using a continuum of participation to define, quote, community membership, unquote, involving, quote, self-identification as a member, repeat contact, and reciprocal familiarity, shared knowledge of some rituals and customs, some sense of obligation and participation, unquote. The community and the network approaches have not been without their critics, particularly from anthropological and ethnographic quarters. However, in evaluating these specific developments of the concept of network, it is also important to be mindful of the disciplinary differences in interest and focus they represent between anthropologists and sociologists. Indeed, we would not want to suggest that anthropologists and ethnographers are not interested in understanding digital worlds through the concepts of community or network. Yet, as often happens, in-depth ethnographic research has tended to question some of the universalizing tendencies of such theories. For example, Host and Miller, 2005 and 2006, question the idea that there is empirically such a thing as, quote, network society, unquote, spreading from the metropolitan north to the rest of the world. Following their ethnographic research into the uses of mobile phones in Jamaica, they found that low-income Jamaicans have their own vernacular forms of networking, which they call link-up. These networks have deep roots in the country's cultural history. Mobile phones did not turn Jamaicans into networked individuals. Rather, they were appropriated into local forms of sociality, relationships, and the reciprocity, becoming for some people a lifeline in times of economic hardship. The plural concept of socialities shows promise as a more ethnographically informed way to understand internet use and its relationship to everyday materialities. For a number of years, anthropologists who have found these existing concepts to be limited for understanding the specificity and the detail of ethnographic work have been developing concepts of sociology as a possible alternative. Amrit 2002 and Pink 2008, Postel 2008 and 2011. The concept of sociology refers not to specific types of relationships per se, but rather to the qualities of social relationships. It is an open concept that enables us to recognize that social relations between people are multiple, can be fluid, and change at different rates. Hence, it also allows us to conceptualize how the ways in which people become related or connected to each other through and with the digital technologies might be simply changing. Across the humanities and social sciences, the concept of sociology has often been used in rather general terms. For instance, the sociologist Andreas Whittel, 2001, has distinguished two main forms of sociology, namely community sociology versus network sociology. For this author, community sociology is the slow, locality-based form of social intercourse that has characterized the human species for most of our cultural history. By contrast, network sociology captures the fast-paced, fleeting, translocal nature of today's urban post-industrial lifestyles. Whittle fleshes out the latter form of sociology by drawing from his late 1990s research into London's new media sector. 2011, Postal 2011. One problem with this dichotomy is that it may prevent us from exploring the diverse range of socialities in the plural that are likely to coexist within a given field site. In this case, the whole of London-based new media workers, it is logical to assume, for instance, that the sociality of a speed dating event in London will be markedly different from that of a pub quiz night, a media lab, or a boarding meeting. A second problem with this binary is that it relies on an odd pairing of vague notions, community and network, that have bedeviled digital media studies for years. As discussed above, hindering our collective understanding of the shifting socio-technical terrains that most of us inhabit today, Postal 2011. Researching social worlds through digital ethnography. Till now, we explored how selected concepts that were developed in the pre-digital era of researching social worlds have been engaged by scholars attending to the internet, digital platforms, technologies, and social and political relationships that within which these are entangled. Concepts of community, network, and sociality have played a role in scholarship that have sought to theorize and research the internet and digital media more generally. In other three ethnographic examples, we look at how these debates have been advanced through contemporary ethnographic research, including studies of web forums. One of these, an ethnographic investigation of the quote, thread sociology, unquote, of a Malaysian web forum. An ethnographic investigation of the thread sociology of a Malaysian web forum. Sorry. One of the strengths of ethnography is that it can help us to expand our conceptual repertoires as researchers, including those related to the study of digitally mediated social worlds. enabling us to develop finer-grained distinctions. Postal 2012A. The notion of sociality just discussed as a case in point. There are many definitions of this term, but here we can provisionally define it as the unique social quality that characterizes a given shared practice or interaction, such as playing tennis, attending a wedding ride, or on a bus, or having a Skype conversation. During John Postel's 2008-2011 work on the internet in the Kuala Lumpur suburb of Subang Jaya, Malaysia, the concept of sociality offered a route into understanding how social worlds are formed in relation to online and offline activity. In this locality, Postel did not find a single community sociality, Vittel 2001, but rather a diversity of essential socialities around practices such as shopping in a mall, playing basketball, attending local committee meetings, and patrolling the streets, or interacting on a local web forum. Thus, the quality of social intercourse and a technological mediation found while patrolling a neighborhood in a notably distinct from that of a committee meeting or a web forum. Thus, while pairs of volunteers and patrollers walk side by side, carrying torches, batons, and mobile phones, committee members face one another around the table, equipped with the pens and papers and the occasional laptop. Meanwhile, forum users engage in remote computer-mediated communication. It would be very odd indeed to treat a committee meeting as if it were a street patrol, or conflate the feel and the ambience of a web forum with that of an offline meeting. Like all other skilled social beings, digital ethnographers doing fieldwork must learn how to navigate different social settings, responding to their social cues, making appropriate use of media technologies in context. Take, for instance, Subang Jaya's main web forum, usj.com.my. The website was founded in 1999 by the local businessman and activist Jeff Oye, who later went on to achieve national fame as a political blogger and opposition MP, Postal 2014. This online forum soon became an important meeting point for Subang Jaya residents wishing to keep informed about wishing to keep informed about local issues, or simply to converse with like-minded people from across the municipality and beyond. Although some of the posts are written in Malay, Mandarin, and other languages, by far the most commonly used language on the forum is the country's middle-class lingua franca, Malaysian English. The forum is open to any topic, although participants must exercise care when broaching the quote, sensitive unquote, matters such as race and religion in a country where Malay Muslims enjoy constitutional privileges that are not extended to non-Muslims. The combination of a large critical mass of users with the freedom to choose almost any topic results in a highly dynamic environment in which participants compete to attract conversational partners to other own threads, thereby gaining visibility and social capital. The forum sustains what we might call, quote, threaded sociality, unquote, a generic form of sociality commonly found across the internet, including mailings lists, web forums, blogs, and personal network sites, but with unique local or subcultural characteristics. As the discussion below shows, threaded sociality in a Sabang Jaya exhibits 7 main features. It is a polylogical, sequential, asynchronous, emotoconic, publicly intimate, online or offline, and political. First, web forum discourse is mostly polylogical. That is, it is neither a monologue nor a dialogue, but rather involves 3 or more conversational partners. Postel learned this lesson the hard way when he created a thread about his fieldwork and invited feedback from other forum users. This was an ill-fated effort at making his ethnographic research more participatory. At an offline gathering, one of the more popular, quote, forumers, unquote, as they are called, nicknamed Orchi, asked John whether he felt that he was talking to himself on that thread. John had to agree with the Orchi, as the thread had not attracted much attention. The implications were clear. The forum fostered a type of suburban sociality based on group conversations, not solely low-keys. Second, in contrast with the general theories of web sociality as being inherently hypertextual and non-linear, example, Casel's 2001, threaded sociality is intratextual and sequential or serial. In other words, thread posts succeed one another within the bounded domain of the forum platform. Although it is true that Sabang Jaya forumers will often share hyperlinks to other websites, participants are still bound in their discursive agency by the linear logic of threads if they wish to sustain a meaningful conversation, which most regulars do. Unlike the overlaps and intermediacies typical of an offline group conversation, particularly in a noisy place such as a bar or pub, thread posts are non-overlapping speech acts. Third, as shown by Mesh and Lebanon 2003 for suburban Israeli listeners, the web forum's asynchronicity allows busy Sabang Jaya residents to stay connected to fellow residents at their own leisure. Because messages are automatically archived, latecomers can scroll up and down a thread in order to join the conversation, either as silent listeners, lurkers, or as posters. Participation is aided by the option of receiving email alerts each time a new post is added to a thread. It is highly significant that forum users subscribe not to the forum as a whole, but to threads. To paraphrase a Twitter marketing slogan, this pre-Twitter site allows local residents to, quote, follow their interests, unquote. Fourth, in contradistinction, practices such as local committee meetings, Sabang Jaya forum users emoticons. Let me repeat. Fourth, in contradistinction, moreover, to gesturally Rich offline practices such as local community meetings, Sabang Jaya to compensate for the relative poverty of offline bodily cues. Peace Hine, 2000. Fifth, forum thread sociality is characterized by what we might call public intimacy. Because of the narrow caste, quasi-oral nature of online threads, participants may feel as if they are sharing a conversation with an intimate group of conversational partners. At the same time, forumers are aware of that potentially anyone in the World Wide Web could be lurking in the shadows. Sixth, although the forum's dominant sociology is web-based, some of the longer threads undergo offline phases throughout their life courses. One of the oldest and lengthiest threads on usj.com.my is devoted to arranging monthly Tariki meetings like the one just mentioned. This thread had clocked 889 posts and close to 35,000 viewings as of 3rd April 2006. By 24 January 2011, the thread had 2,837 posts and over 125,000 viewings and 190 pages. These sessions take place on the first Friday of every month and attract some 10 to 15 enthusiasts. This may not seem like a large number, but it does constitute a hard core of forum supporters, vital to its long-term sustainability. Such face-to-face encounters have their own polylogical character, albeit of the offline variety. Utterances overlap, unmoderated topics and subtopics break off rapidly and the group splinters into subgroups. Break off rapidly and the group splinters into subgroups. Finally, in the specific case of the Sabang Jaya e-community forum, thread socially can be seen as political because it is marked by the conflicting priorities of the forum administrators on the one hand and the majority of regular users on the other. For the managing team led by the activist Jeff Oy, at least until he became occupied with extra local matters, the forum was an experimental means towards an end, namely to strengthen local governance. For most users, however, the forum is primarily a source of local information, entertainment, and conviviality. One of Waldenberg's 1989 quote, "third places," unquote, venues where suburbanites can socialize outside the home and the workplace, such as in pubs, bowling clubs, and post offices. When a critical issue that affects them directly emerges on the forum, many will join the campaigning, but during peaceful periods, most will remain uninvolved. How applicable is the notion of threaded sociality to social worlds beyond the specificities of this unique Malaysian suburb? How applicable is the notion of a threaded sociality to social worlds beyond the specificities of this unique Malaysian suburbs? Further, a research world would be required to answer this question. Yet, recent research elsewhere, Postal and Pink, 2012, our everyday experiences as users suggest that this notion could shed light on the social dynamics found on digital platforms as diverse as mailing lists, Twitter, Weibo, Facebook, or WhatsApp. The terminology and syntax will vary from one platform to another. Thread, hashtag, trending topic, comments, chart, and so on. But all these sites organize their conversations through discrete series of bounded posts, that is through threads. It is reasonable to assume then that myriad variants of thread sociology have emerged worldwide. It is reasonable to assume then that myriad variants of threaded sociology have emerged worldwide in recent years, variants that are ripe for comparative ethnographic research. Second example, the birth of a new social world, an ethnographic approach to understanding the indignados. The Malaysian example just presented concerns a social world that remained. The Malaysian example just presented concerns a social world that remained fairly stable throughout the main period of fieldwork. However, digital ethnographers will sometimes find that the social worlds they are searching will experience dramatic changes over a short period of time. In some cases, they may even witness the birth of a new social world while in the field. This is precisely what happened to Postel whilst conducting fieldwork among internet activists in Barcelona, Spain in mid-May 2011. With little prior warning, the small internet activism scene he had been researching for 10 months was swept up by a tidal wave of popular indignation involving millions of Spanish citizens who took to the streets and squares demanding, quote, real democracy now, unquote, Postel 2014, Postel and Pink 2012. This wave soon came to be known as the indignados, outraged, or 15 movement, a new gigantic social world demanding urgent investigation. Here is a rough outline of the events. When some 40 anti-austerity protesters decided to stage a sit at Madrid's main square of 16th May, the repercussions for reinforcements via Twitter and other social media. Their numbers grew into the hundreds during the day. Yet it was only when they were removed from the square by the police on. This led to the retaking of the square, only now all walks of life, an action that was soon replicated in dozens of other squares up and down the country. What started on 15 May as a series of peaceful marches had turned within 48 hours into the Tahrir Square, a Cairo-inspired occupation of countless squares across Spain. The fledgling protests had morphed into a mass social movement, a social media phenomenon, and a global media event. Within days, millions of Spaniards were exchanging a huge volume of 15 million digital content, 15 M digital contents through emails, Facebook, Twitter, 20 blogs, and countless other platforms, both on desktop computers and handheld devices. Rodriguez, 2011. Since those eventful days, Forstall has sought to conceptualize the 15M social world in a number of different ways. We could regard these efforts as a diachronic, quote, multi-timed, unquote, versions, Forstall 2012b, of the influential, quote, follow the, unquote, approach, a multi-sited ethnographic research proposed by Marcus, 1995. Here we briefly review some of them, namely following the virtual contents, the digital technologies, the field of contention, the protester temporalities. With regards to virality, Forstall 2014 has recently argued that we are entering a new age of viral reality in media, in which media amateurs and professionals are co-defining what constitutes a newsworthy story through citizens' increased ability to choose which digital contests to share or not with their personal networks. These hybrid media formidable challenges. These hybrid media systems, Chadwick, these, quote, hybrid media systems, unquote, Chadwick 2013, or, quote, quote, convergence cultures, unquote, Jenkins, pose formidable challenges to ethnographers and require new conceptual tools and approaches. In this vein, Forstall 2014 outlines a new research program that he terms, quote, media epidemiography. Media epidemiography. Let me repeat this. In this vein, Forstall 2014 outlines a new research program that he terms, quote, media epidemiography. Let me repeat. In this vein, Forstall 2014 outlines a new research program that he terms media epidemiography, unquote. This concept blends Spencer's 1996 epidemiology of representations with the ethnography of digital media. By analogy, with medical epidemiology. This concept blends Spencer's 1996 quote, epidemiology of representations, unquote, with ethnography of digital media. By analogy with the medical epidemiology, its remit is to track the epidemic, let me repeat this. This concept blends Spencer's 1996 quote, epidemiology of representations, unquote, with the ethnography of digital media. By analogy with medical epidemiology, its remit is to track the endemic and epidemic distribution of digital contents or representations across a given population. In this case, 15M contents across Spain through ethnographic means. For a protest movement like 15M, Forstall 2014 proposes 4 working types of viral form. Campaign virals, that is campaign contents that go viral. Viral campaigns, the whole campaign goes viral. Niche virals, digital contents shared within a specific demographic, example, law students or law students in Barcelona, and sustainable virals, contents that become endemic within a whole population. Example, the slogan, real democracy now, across Spain. Given the speed with which digital contents will sometimes spread, media epidemiographers will have to develop new digital forensics technologies to investigate them retrospectively, such as through interviews with activists involved in creating campaign memes, Twitter trending topics, and the like. A second avenue open to the digital ethnographer is to follow one or more technologies as they traverse different social contexts. Marcus, 1995, Spitulik, 2002. For instance, Monterde and Fostel, 2014, tracked the uses of mobile phones by 15 participants during the first semester of the movement's existence. Through both the qualitative and the quantitative data, they found a great deal of variation from one event or action to another, coining the notion, quote, mobile ensembles, unquote, to refer to the unique mix of digital media, participants, and issues found in each instance. This term is derived from the earlier notions of, quote, media ensembles, unquote, that was introduced by the media theorist Bausinger, 1984, to refer to the combination of radio, TV, print media typically found in the Western home in the early 1980s. Another option available to the digital ethnographer is to follow not the technologies, but rather technologies. For instance, a postal has followed a specific subcategory of political actor he calls, quote, freedom technologies, unquote. That is, those people who are passionately interested in the limits and possibilities of new digital technologies for progressive political change. Example, bloggers, vloggers, hackers, geeks, online journalists, civil rights lawyers, etc. In this context, quote, following, unquote, does not necessarily entail physical shadowing participants in real time. Digital ethnographers will often retrace the steps of key participants after the fact by means of interviews, web archives, and social media platforms, field notes, and other materials. Thus, Postil has translated and edited a series of transcripts of YouTube interviews with the Spanish Freedom Technologies available on a 15M website. The interviews were neither commissioned nor conducted by the ethnographer, but rather by a collective of Freedom Technologies. He then shared these, quote, para-ethnographic, unquote, materials, Holmes and Marcus, 2008. On his research blog, in turn, these posts have been recirculated via Twitter and other sites by the research participants, thereby researching non-academic audiences. As digital technologies and free or open deals and practices continues to spread, such intersections between the work of ethnographers, activists, and other political actors will become more habitual and potentially rewarding. Finally, the digital ethnographer can approach a social world like 15M genealogically, that is by teasing out its entangled processual lineages, eschewing the received notion of non-linear time, popular in anthropology since 1980s. Postal forthcoming opts instead for the idea of multilinearity, reworking a conceptual trinity developed by the historian William Sewell, 2005. Postel distinguishes between 15M events, routines and trends as three distinct forms of temporality with their own unique trajectories or lineages. He notes that not all media events in Dayan and Katz 1992 classic formulation qualify as a 15M events in the civilian sense of the term. To qualify as such, they must transform the movement field. For example, when 15M participants throughout Spain, for example, when 15M participants throughout Spain abandoned the occupied squares in June 2011 to relocate to local neighborhoods, this move had a profound effect on the movement, marking a new stage in its evolution. Events such as this will have a direct impact on a social world, web of routines. Will some square routines survived the relocation, example, holding assemblies. Others perished in the process. Finally, trends are of interest not only to the diachronic ethnographer, but also to the movement field participants themselves. Perceived trends push 15M collective action towards traits regarded as a desirable, example, non-violence, and away from those seen as undesirable by most participants. Example, a turn towards violent direct action. Third example, the ethnography of the games industry in Australia. Ethnography of the games industry in Australia, alternative routes for gender performativity. As gaming becomes increasingly part of mainstream culture, we are beginning to see other modes of gaming subcultures, including what is called, quote, cosplay, unquote. Cosplay is short form of costume play. Cosplay is a short form of, quote, costume play, unquote. And cosplayers take their inspiration from games, manga, comics, anime, animation, and movies. As a subcultural movement, various forms of on and around the world express their interest in Japanese popular culture creatively. In turn, cosplay also provides a great example of how new types of fan agency and professionalization of players genres like esports, as they become progressively synonymous with the contemporary popular culture and thus part of emergent social worlds. Role as a vehicle of transition is significant in the rites of passage for many young females as they enter into the traditionally male-centered gaming worlds, thus moving from being game players to co-designers and producers. It is this transition from player to producer and producer that is pivotal in the emerging forms of female engagement and agency in an industry games that is largely dominated by men. Phenomena such as cosplay reassert Japan's central role in the imaginings of digital popular culture circuits in the region. For many, rites of passage into gaming in local locations, for many rites of passage into gaming in locations such as Australia and Taiwan involve a disavowal. Let me repeat this. For many, rites of passage into gaming in locations such as Australia and Taiwan involve a disavowal of USA, quote, mainstream, unquote, games in exchange for subcultural and cool Japanese games. This is an alternative entrance into the global gaming that unites players across the transnational borders while reorienting Japan as the alternative center for popular culture. But this is not a mere mirroring of Japanization with Americanization, as homogeneous definitions of globalization would have it. Rather, forms of localization emerge as gaming shifts from the periphery to the center of 21st century media cultures. As Craig Norris, 2007, has discussed, there is a trend for Australian fans to use anime and manga to explore gender and racial identities that produce different forms of cultural capital and identity. While there is a growing body of scholarly research on cosplayers in locations such as Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and South Korea, Ito et al. 2012, in Australia, there has been comparatively little research done despite the existence of conventions such as Animania that are dedicated to the key event, the cosplay competition, as Patricia Manunder notes in Dress Up and Play Cool. As Patricia Maunders notes in, quote, Dress Up and Play Cool, unquote, cosplay provides a space where, quote, games meet reality, unquote, 2009. One of the first cosplay inventions has held at the Australian Centre for Independent Gaming, Melbourne, in 2000. With the beginning of the now annual Manifest Melbourne Anime Festival convention in 2002, Animania began in Sydney, expanding to Brisbane and Melbourne. According to cosplayer and manager of Animia, Kenny Travellini, and Australian cosplayers draw from 60% anime and 40% games, with the level of professionalism and commitment excelling each year. So much so that in 2009, an Australian team will attend the Holy Grail for cosplayers, apart from the Tokyo Game Show, the World Cosplay Summit in Nagoya. One of the significant differences in the politics of cosplaying in Australia, as opposed to Taiwan or Hong Kong, is the issue of multiculturalism. In Australia, East, Southeast Asia, European and Anglo-Saxon young people can take the guise of a cosplayer performing a different ethnicity and gender. For Melbourne cosplayers, Anna Nguyen and Jenny McCaskill, quote, they are not limited to female personas, unquote, as many male characters in Japanese pop culture, or what Nguyen describes as, quote, pretty, unquote, cited in Mulder 2008. In Australia, the consumption of Japanese culture In Australia, the consumption of Japanese popular culture provides an alternative avenue for imagining localization and globalization. It reorients Australia away from its colonial past and into its geo-ideological proximity into the region, reimagining Australia as part of the quote, Asia Pacific, unquote. Events such as Manifest provide cosplayers with official occasions to perform. However, for many, much of the time spent being a cosplayer is adopting this performativity within everyday settings. Many of the cosplaying young females whom Hijot interviewed had enrolled in a games program degree and saw it as an integral part of being involved in the cultural industries, whereby entanglements between the online and offline can converge. Let me repeat this. Many of the cosplaying young females of whom Hijot interviewed had enrolled in a games program degree and saw it as an integral part of being involved in the cultural industries, whereby entanglements between the online and offline can converge. Indeed, for many cosplayers, this is a full-time passion that runs through their various activities extending beyond periods when in costume. Cosplayers are always looking for inspiration, both the online and offline, to make their costume better, often reflecting on potential choices and decisions. Given Melbourne's relative multiculturalism, the issue of ethnicity further complicates the gender performativity and a reimagining of Japan evoked by cosplaying. Cosplay provides a space for players. Cultural and ethnic and gender performative diversity is celebrated rather than undermined. It is this ethnic diversity in constructing types of femininity around imagining Japan perceives cosplaying, along with the role cosplaying in affording young women entrance into the games industry. That is the focus of this example. For example, how does a Hong Kong-born student studying in a games program in Melbourne configure her identity within a Melbourneian context in order to consume Japan? Conducted in the later part of 2000 and early 2008 in Melbourne, a study of 15 young female cosplayers aged between 18 and 26 years was initiated by Larissa Hijot, the experiences as a teacher in a university games program and her frequenting events such as the Tokyo Game Show. Many of the cosplayers Hijot interviewed were studying in games programs and are hoping to gain long-term employment in the industry. The study was motivated by the phenomenon that Hijot began to see as young women shifted from consumers and players to producers. And the study was motivated by a phenomenon that Hijot began to see the young woman shifted from consumers and players to producers and a game designer. See Hijot and Chan, 2009. Through interviewing in which players talked to their creations and their relationship to their cultural, social, to their social worlds, along with participant observation at both official cosplay and unofficial settings. Hijot started to understand the performative elements and how they related to the presentations of self, imagining Japan and the realities of the games industry in Australia. Cosplayers often perform in both official cosplay conventions and unofficial everyday contexts. This movement between unofficial and official plays an important role in the performative elements. In this example, we will focus on Rachel, and focus on, quote, Rachel, unquote, a game student who epitomized the spirit of cosplaying. As Rachel stated, the thing with the cosplay is when outside a convention or a photo shoot or stuff like that, it's hard to tell who is a cosplayer or not. Sometimes you can tell who is a cosplayer outside of these events. A cosplayer's casual clothing sometimes stands out more than the quote, everyday, unquote, persons. Let's face it, the cosplayers can be attention whores. But at the same time, you can't really tell them apart from people who like to dress differently. Rachel, Melbourne, 20 December 2007. Reflecting on social worlds and digital ethnography, these three examples of ethnographic research extend previous work into the digital mediation of social worlds by engaging with questions of identity, sociality, boundaries, change, and continuity. Taken together, these cases offer new methodological and theoretical vistas onto the rich diversity of technological mediations in the reconstruction and maintenance of social worlds. One insight explored above is a possibility that a given social world may experience dramatic changes during ethnographic fieldwork, sometimes within a matter of days or weeks. As a species spread throughout the planet, our social worlds have always been subject to sudden changes, including internal and external shocks caused by war, famine, natural disasters, and so on. Flightstein and McAdam, 2012. What distinguishes the current era is the added element of speed and the reach of information enabled by our modern transport and telecommunication networks, and most recently by the proliferation of online and mobile digital media. This has profound implications for various social phenomena, including the spread of protests across national territory and even across borders, as we witnessed in the wave of protests across the Mediterranean and the North Atlantic in 2011. In the Spanish Indignados example taken from Postel's work, we saw how a small sitting in a central Madrid square soon morphed into a new mass movement that took Spain's political class and with their Marcus 1995, with their follow the heuristic. Digital ethnographers are well placed to follow the protesters, unquote. Or their technologies, virals, events, and so on, across rapidly with their follow the heuristic, follow the protesters, or their technologies, virals, events, and so on, across rapidly changing social and political terrain. There are great opportunities here for ethnographers interested in activism and social movements. There are great opportunities here for ethnographers interested in activism and social movements to develop new epidemiological techniques in partnership with the colleagues from quantitative fields. These will enable These would enable them to not only study ephemeral virals, but also to design new techniques to understand the rate and quality of fluctuations in personal issues, actions, slogans, and so on, typically experienced by today's protest movements. Eventually, these investigations could be extended to the epidemiographic study of other social worlds, including those that appear to be relatively stable and unchanging by comparison to new protest movements. Indeed, in paying so much attention to high-profile media events, such as the Arab Spring or Hong Kong pro-democracy protests, we could be missing out on more subtle changes taking place outside of the media limelight. Another insight arising from the examples concerns the problematic status of popular digital media studies metaphors such as the code, community, unquote, and network. Discussed in the earlier parts of this chapter of the book. As explained earlier, the concepts of community and network have had a checkered career in the social sciences, owing to their vagueness, normativity, and overexposure. Each example allowed us to take a peek into a very different, indeed unique social world. But why should we be wary of calling Melbourne cosplayers or Sabang Jaya residents a community, or of regarding Spain's Indignados movement as a network? Shouldn't people who regard themselves as a community or as a network have the right to be called by that name if they so wish? These are difficult questions, for they are prone to conceptual muddles on the part of both authors and readers. To broach them, we need to recall once again the crucial distinction between emica, vernacular, and etica, scholarly terms. While some terms can function equally well as emica and etic terms, for example, the words car, house, or tree, others are inherently problematic as etic concepts, for example, nation, God, or community. This is because the latter type of terms refer to an abstract, vague, and or a fictional entity that lies beyond empirical investigation. In other words, the ontological or empirical, that is empirical, status of God is of an altogether different order from that of the chair or a motorbike or a cosplayer. However, this analytical distinction between emica, vernacular, and etic academic understandings of a community does not mean that ethnographers can ignore local sensibilities. For instance, the earnestly felt sense among many in Barcelona that Catalonia is a bounded national community with its own distinctive history, language, and culture. At this point, the reader may query the notion of quote, social world, unquote. After all, a social world could refer to practically any array of people, practices, and artifacts. It is as vague a term as community or network. Are we not practicing double standards? Here we must again proceed with caution. While it is true that social world is a highly polysemic concept, it comes with a fewer moral or normative strings attached in the ways that long since established concepts such as community, network do. Unlike community, with its pleasant connotations of warmth and togetherness, or network with its suggestions of horizontality and connectivity. Social world is a neutral, heuristic concept that invites empirical investigation and comparative analysis. Moreover, it is not associated with any ideological current, as is the case with the communitarianism and networkism. See Juris 2008. Again, allowing the field worker to resist the temptation of prematurely labeling the social actualities under investigation. Summing up, in the 6th chapter of this textbook, which is prescribed for our course work on digital ethnography, the authors used the notion of social worlds as a starting point for discussing the various different concepts that social science and humanities scholars have developed and engaged for studying the ways in which people group together and or understand themselves to be members of the groups. We discussed how concepts such as community and network have come to dominate sociological discussions and showed how anthropologists have developed concepts such as sociology as alternatives to these in order to think about how relationships between people in groups emerge. As scholarly debates, theory and ethnographic practice have shifted their focus towards the digital concepts that purports the concept that purports to describe social collectives have increasingly been tested out and debated in relation to how people group together and perceive themselves and their relationships to others online. A digital ethnography approach is particularly appreciative of the ways in which people who participate in social worlds come to comprehend them and make meaning of them. This is because the work of the digital ethnographers involves seeking means to gain an appreciation of what it feels like to be part of social worlds that are configured across large geographic distances. Often there is slippage between the terms that people use to refer to their social worlds and those used by academics, which can, if we are not careful, lead to confusion. Part of the work of the digital ethnographers is, therefore, to be aware of these different layers and distinction, and to make the connections between categories and the ways in which participants themselves experience and make meaning of and their social worlds and the socio-technical relationships that compose them. Yeah. So this is how the authors of the book of the digital ethnography principles and practice have explained the concept of social worlds for the context of digital ethnography, and what are the key concepts, key terms, not concepts, key terms like community and network, sociality, and other terms that are developed by the researchers and scholars. So, yeah, those are very important for us to understand before we undertake a digital ethnographic work in our interested areas. Thank you for listening. See you in the next session. Thank you. Bye. Namaste.
Papa? Ayun na.